Each company has a business strategy that paints a broad picture of how it will compete in the market. A strategic plan describes how to determine actions to support the mission, goals and objectives of an organization. It generally includes an organization's explicit mission, goals and objectives and the specific actions needed to achieve those goals and objectives. Designing and building the right supply chain, one that promotes the business strategies, may just be the most powerful way to gain an edge on the competition, to move faster, deliver more value, and be more flexible in the face of both steady change and surprises. The supply chain strategy is a complex and evolving way that organizations use to distinguish themselves in the competitive contests to create value for their customers and investors. Here you can see how the direction of an organization is predicated on its business strategy. Of course, many organizations now also use mission and vision statements to give clarity to their purpose. If these strategies are not aligned, the direction and fit will be askew. All three strategies are linked together and dependent. Business strategy is a plan for choosing how to compete. There are three generic business strategies: least cost, differentiation, and focus. Organizational strategy identifies how a company will function in its environment and specifies how to satisfy customers, how to grow the business, how to compete, how to manage the company and develop capabilities, and how to achieve the financial objectives. Then, supply chain strategy is a strategy for how the supply chain will function in its environment to meet the goals of the organization's business and organizational strategies. Competitive advantages are closely related to business strategy because they outline the advantages the organization should realize once it has decided how it will compete. The key processes that supply chain managers need to be able to perform related to developing the supply chain strategy are aligning with the business strategy and creating the supply chain strategy. Let's explore both of them. The purpose of aligning with the business strategy involves a couple of steps. Reviewing the organization's current business plan, financial statements, and other information, and analysis related to business strategy. And the purpose is to learn the organization's overall strategic objectives, its value proposition for customers and stakeholders, and how it will differentiate itself in the marketplace to compete and grow in the face of change and uncertainty. Gathering information on the external environment, including customer requirements, competitor businesses and supply chain strategies, market size, market shares, overall conditions, regional, local, industry, market conditions, global risks and opportunities. Reviewing current supply chain capacity, resilience, sustainability and adaptability to understand the current state, the actual state of supply chain. Analyzing actual alignment to business strategy in the current environment. The process of creating a supply chain strategy that is complementary to the business model and the current environment involves the following steps. Defining customer service objectives for business to business and business to consumer. Selecting a revenue model including direct or indirect sales channels for each customer segment. Mapping the supply chain objectives and business objectives. Aligning in-house versus contracted supply chain operating models and cost structures to organizational core capabilities and strategy. Here we could include aligning the operating model, make to stock, make to order, aligning cost structure or asset footprint, property, plant and equipment, human resources, and so on. Documenting the strategy, including clarifying the supply chain value proposition and creating a network model. Presenting and marketing the strategy to get executive and supply chain partner support and approval. Accepting feedback and making agreed on changes, getting approval for the strategy, comparing supply chain strategy to actual supply chain capacity, resilience, sustainability, and adaptability. And last one, but very important one, creating action plans to resolve misalignments or gaps between desired and actual supply chain strategy. Regardless of the type of supply chain a company establishes internally across functions and externally with trading partners, success depends first on alignment of supply chain strategy and organizational strategy. When it comes to aligning organizational and supply chain strategies, it's useful to think about the process in terms of a flowchart. This flowchart here provides a graphic representation of the strategic decision-making process that goes into aligning organizational and supply chain strategies. Let's talk about a little bit on this picture. The flowchart shows that the management of the organization must first identify its customers, products, competition, and socio-economic environment, and then determine the mission and overall goals that support those factors. The organization needs to be able to identify and leverage its distinctive competences and note the areas where it lacks expertise, since those capabilities can later be outsourced if appropriate. Then these decisions feed into the organization's market and external environment analysis, as well as its organizational strategy. They in turn drive the future direction and competitive priorities, which then help determine the appropriate strategies of the various functional areas, like finance, marketing, and the supply chain. Those strategies drive the supply chain capabilities of the present, the immediate future, and the long term. These supply chain capabilities feed into a continuous loop and help the organization determine how to continuously adjust its competitive priorities of cost, quality, time, and price to support its dynamic organizational strategy. Once the supply chain strategy is in place and there is confirmation that it is properly aligned with organizational strategy, the organization will likely need to be flexible and change the supply chain strategy when circumstances warrant taking a new direction. In this and following lecture, we will talk about the objectives of supply chain management strategy. It is true that companies have always been involved in managing their distinct functions, such as planning, buying, manufacturing, delivering products, and getting paid. But with supply chain management, this has evolved from control of discrete business functions to an emphasis on business process excellence and the management of a network of relationships tied together by complex information. The objectives of planning and implementing a sound strategy for supply chain management practices, systems, and technologies include some components that we are going to discuss. First is improving market knowledge. With supply chain management strategies in place, partners in the supply chain begin to share their knowledge about the marketplace and in particular about their customers. It may take some time for the organizations to build trust before they share their account information. Although market intelligence can be purchased from outside sources, it's most advantageous and less expensive to gather it from your partners. There are myriad of sources and documents containing valuable customer information that can be shared between supply chain partners, including transaction records, customer survey results, sales knowledge, information from distribution points, etc. If these types of market information is not coming from a supply chain partner, another option, as we said, is to purchase data from survey companies and database marketing companies. Service or finance bureaus can provide broad information about the customer. As opposed to the other sources of data we just said, such data do not necessarily paint a picture of a business's own customers. Purchase data may be more useful in acquiring new customers than in managing relationships with existing ones. Implementing the 3 V's. Often called the 3 V's of supply chain management, visibility, velocity, and variability are key elements of successful supply chain strategy. No matter what the competitive priorities, the goal of supply chain management is to increase visibility and velocity while reducing variability. Visibility is the ability to view important information throughout a facility or supply chain, no matter where in the facility or supply chain the information is located. Increased visibility along the supply chain is a benefit for supply chain partners and the end customer too. With better visibility, a supply chain manager or employee can see the results of activities occurring in the chain and is made aware of minor incremental changes via technological processes. For instance, point-of-sale data may be visible to computers in warehouses, manufacturing plant and suppliers' facilities. Data about a sale can instantaneously trigger appropriate actions in all those places automatically. Also, better visibility results in greater velocity. The flow of physical materials and services, cash, information, and returns, the reverse flow of products for repairs, recycling, or disposal, benefit from being increased in speed and efficiency. Supply chain management impacts the velocity of these 4 flows in a positive manner. Velocity is a term used to indicate the relative speed of all transactions within a supply chain community. A maximum velocity is most desirable because it indicates a higher asset turnover for stockholders and faster order-to-delivery response for customers. Velocity-like visibility is enhanced by supply chain management. Here are some methods of increasing the velocity of transactions along the supply chain. For instance, relying on more rapid modes of transportation, reducing the time in which inventory is not moving or idle time, for example by using just-in-time delivery or lean manufacturing. Eliminating activities that don't add value, or so-called non-value-added activities. In this way, reducing the time required to accomplish supply chain activities. Speeding up the flow of demand and cash, as well as the velocity of inventory. The more rapidly payments are received from customers, the sooner the money can be put to work in the business or deposited. Reduced variability. Variability is the natural tendency of the results of all business activities to fluctuate above and below an average value, such as fluctuations around the average time to completion, the average number of defects, average daily sales, or average production yield. Supply chain management works to reduce variability in both supply and demand as much as possible. The traditional offset against variability is safety stock. If greater visibility along the chain results in greater velocity, supply chain managers should also be able to reduce the amounts of safety stock required to match supply to spikes in demand. Demand variability has many causes, but a primary cause that can be minimized is the bullwhip effect. The bullwhip effect is an extreme change in the supply position upstream that is generated by a small change in demand downstream in the chain. Inventory can quickly move from being back-ordered to being in excess, due to the serial nature of communicating orders up the chain with the inherent transportation delays of moving product down the supply chain. We're going to talk a bit more about the bullwhip effect and its effect on demand management and supply chain planning and sales and operations planning later in the course. There are some additional V's that also might be considered by supply chain managers. First one is vocalization, refers to the need to have good communication between supply chain partners as a vital way to prevent the bullwhip effect, rather than just assuming that current orders will form a reliable pattern. Variety refers to the mix of products and services in a portfolio that must alter to meet changes in customer demand. And volume is the amount of product being produced in a given time. A supply chain must be flexible enough to expand and contract volume to meet changes in demand for mass customized products and services. We continue with the last three objectives of supply chain management strategy. Earlier in the previous lectures, we discussed that achieving the benefits of supply chain management requires mastery of connected processes, and as supply chains evolve, their ability to streamline key operational processes and flows also increases. With supply chain management, the day-to-day functioning of the organization is smoother, with fewer process-related organizational issues. Because by streamlining operations, the organization is able to identify each supply chain partner and step, identify bottlenecks or problem areas in the supply chain, identify and remove or simplify unnecessary steps or that do not add value for customers and partners, know who is responsible for each sub-step or task within a longer process and how it impacts the supply chain performance and output, identify interdependent processes and know how a change in one might affect another. The benefits of streamlined operations are felt enterprise-wide and across functions. The resulting increased speed also enhances the flow velocity of cash, information, and physical materials and services in the supply chain. Improving risk management or management of risk. We know that all investments involve risk, including those in any supply chain. A risk is generally defined as a hazard, a source of danger, or a possibility of incurring loss, misfortune, or injury. With supply chain management, the organization develops a risk management strategies and plan in advance that describe how it will address vulnerabilities by avoiding, accepting, transferring, or mitigating risk. Managing risk proactively gives an organization an edge over its competition. Proactive risk planning benefits the company in a couple of ways. First, it helps keep the supply chain flexible so it can continue functioning despite disruptive events. which in turn helps balance the costs of contingency planning against potential economic, facility losses, resources, or inventory problems. Risks are shared among supply chain partners who will be prepared to work in concert and play their parts responsibly. Risk planning prepares the employees, workforce, and supply chain partners with valuable, actionable information and confidence to handle nearly any situation with a good, well thought out strategy based on substantial risk data. With a risk strategy and plan in place, supply chains typically improve their chances of keeping materials, information, and payments flowing through the network and arriving everywhere in the right numbers at the right time and in a good shape, even in cases of risk events. There is a whole section later in the course which we're going to explore the supply chain risk management in details. And the last objective, increase sustainability. Sustainability and green are very trendy nowadays, and they are often used as synonyms in discussions of corporate company obligations that go beyond the traditional focus on bottom line profits. Both terms refer to the need for economic activity to operate within limits imposed by natural resources. Business and consumer practices that rely upon energy derived from fossil fuels, for example, cannot be sustained beyond the availability of such energy resources. Supply chain management incorporates sustainability efforts, such as the replacement of resources as they are used, and increased usage and reliance on wind and solar energy to power manufacturing processes. There is also a lot of lectures later related with sustainability practices, closed-loop supply chains, also reverse logistics later in the course. Logistics strategy. Some decisions are very important to an organization with consequences felt over many years, while others are less important. There are three levels of decisions. Strategic are most important and set the overall direction of the organization. They have effects over the long term, involve many resources, and are the most risky. Tactical implement the strategies over the medium term and look at more detail, involve few resources and some risk. Operational decisions are the most detailed and concern activities over the short term. They involve few resources and little risk. A traditional view has senior managers making the strategic decisions that set their organization on its course. These strategic decisions give the objectives, constraints, and context for the tactical decisions made by middle managers. These in turn set the objectives, constraints, and context for operational decisions made by junior managers. In essence, strategic decisions show what the organization wants to do, tactical ones show how to do it, and operational actually do it. The long-term strategic decisions also occur at different levels, as shown in this picture. Mission or vision is a precise statement that gives the overall purpose and aims of an organization. It shows what the organization wants to do, its responsibilities, values, measures, and so on. Corporate strategy shows how a whole diversified corporation will achieve its mission. This typically describes the industries and markets to work in, levels of diversification, amount of integration, and so on. Business strategy shows how each business within a diversified corporation contributes to the corporate strategy. This typically shows the type of products to make, customers to serve, geographical coverage, innovation, and so on. Functional strategy shows how each function within a business will contribute to the business strategy. This typically shows the long-term plans for each function, such as logistics, finance, marketing, operations, and so on. In its turn, a logistics strategy sets the context for all tactical and operational decisions within logistics. If the logistics strategy is to reduce logistics costs to a minimum, all our decisions will be made with this in mind and constantly look for ways of reducing costs. A logistics strategy contains everything related to the long-term direction of logistics within an organization. A logistics strategy consists of all the long-term goals, plans, policies, culture, resources, decisions, and actions that relate to the management of an organization's supply chain. This definition suggests a broad scope and that, in common with all other strategies, a logistics strategy is a complex mixture of parts. You can find that logistics strategy commonly contain elements like the following: a summary statement giving an overview of the logistics strategy and how this relates to other strategies and parts of the organization, the underlying beliefs and culture of logistics, ethical standpoints, priorities, and so on. The goals of logistics, identifying the customers, market, suppliers, services, performance, and so on. A description of how the logistics function will achieve these aims, describing the type of activities, changes needed to current practices, and how the changes will be managed. Policies about supply chain structure, including ownership, geographical coverage, number and size of facilities, and so forth. Policies about the movement of materials, including control systems, technology used, performance measures, and so on. Resources needed to achieve the strategy, how these are managed, together with projections of costs and financial performance. A description of the way that the strategy affects the rest of the business. Whatever the details of its contents, a logistics strategy forms a link between the more abstract higher strategies and the detailed operations of the supply chain. While the corporate and business strategy describe broad aims, the logistics strategy concerns the actual movement of materials needed to achieve them. The design of a logistics strategy starts with managers considering what their logistics must achieve in the long term and then designing a strategy to achieve it. In essence, they want the long-term shape of logistics to give the best possible support to the business strategy. This suggests a long-term aim for logistics, and managers might summarize this in a logistics mission. In the same way that an organization's mission is a simple statement of its underlying aims, a logistics mission states the long-term aims of the supply chain. The key to successful planning is to get the best fit between the chosen tools and techniques, the organization's current culture, capabilities and business environment, and the desired outcome. This usually means finding ways to match what the organization is good at with the customer's wants, often described as achieving strategic fit. In practice, managers have to balance three factors as shown on the slide. Higher strategies, which set the organization's broad goals and the context for all logistics decisions. The logistics strategy must support the mission, corporate and business strategies. For example, when a business strategy calls for high customer service, the logistics strategy must show how logistics will achieve this. The business environment consists of the two factors that are external to the logistics function and over which it has no control. These include customers and their expectations, attitudes, demographics, market conditions, size, location, stability, technology, current availability, developments, innovation, economic climate, gross domestic product, rate of growth, inflation, and some other factors such as legal restraints, competitors, shareholders, interest groups, and so on. Internal strengths are the activities that logistics does particularly well. An organization can only succeed by developing distinctive capabilities, which are key activities that it does better than competitors. So logistics managers must develop distinctive capabilities to set them apart from competitors. These may take many forms, but are based mostly on the use of assets such as customers and their demands, loyalty relationships, suppliers and their services, flexibility partnerships, operations, types, quality, flexibility, the skills, expertise and knowledge of employees, the types and locations of facilities, their capacity and reliability, and some other strengths such as finances, technology, innovation, and so on. The business environment and distinctive competence essentially show where an organization is now, and the higher strategies show where it wants to be in the future. The logistics strategy shows how to move from one to the other. Although there is no standard method for designing a strategy, a reasonable general approach has the following 8 steps we're going to see. Step 1 is assess the current logistics strategy. Apart from entirely new operations, there must be some logistics strategy in place, even if it is implicit rather than formally recorded. So an obvious starting point is to analyze the current strategy and see how well it is working. And we should focus on the contents of the current strategy, apparent problems with the current strategy, real problems with the strategy, amount of adjustments needed. The second step, define the goals of logistics. These are set by the higher strategies, so manager should analyze the business and other strategies, expand the logistics mission into a series of specific strategic goals, and translate these goals into more precise objectives. Step 3. Analyze the business environment from a logistics perspective. The environment consists of a complex picture of business, competitive, economic, political, technological, cultural, social factors, all of which interact and are constantly changing. A logistics environmental scan analyzes this by focusing on circumstances within the organizations outside logistics, such as finance, marketing, conditions in the organization's external environment, such as competition, markets, economy, opportunities, and threats. Step 4. Analyze the current logistics. This needs a logistics audit which systematically collects information about existing logistics and typically includes details of all current logistics activities and practices, analysis of the success of logistics in satisfying organizational needs, areas for key logistics decisions such as customer service levels, investments, transportation, use of resources with capacities, costs, and performance measures, benchmarks for logistics comparing performance with industry leaders, changes needed to adopt the industry's best practices, strengths and weaknesses. Step 5. List alternative new logistics strategy. There is never a single right strategy, so managers may generate a number of feasible alternatives. By considering an ideal future state for logistics, generating a set of alternative logistics strategies, that would move towards this ideal, considering the resources needed by each strategy and assessing the likely performance of each strategy in different conditions. Step 6. Compare these alternative strategies and choose the best, based on a couple of factors. Which strategy contributes most to achieving logistics goals? Which performs better in terms of customer satisfaction, resource utilizations, etc.? How much the organization's capabilities and resources limit the alternatives that are feasible. Step 7. Adding details to the chosen strategy, defining the logistics infrastructure, describing the broad features of logistics, designing the structure of supply chains in terms of length, breadth, facility location, capacity, technology, defining the best organizational structure, controls and systems, setting performance targets, designing any other features included in the logistics strategy. And last one, step 8, implementing the strategy, where managers translate the designed strategy into actual operations by planning the implementation, initiating the process for getting new ideas, methods and goals, initiating the design and implementation of new operations, setting performance targets for all levels of logistics, monitoring actual performance, and controlling the strategy, looking for improvements and making adjustments along the way. This procedure is based on a balance of the three factors from the previous lecture: hire strategies, the business environment, and internal strengths. The procedure is undoubtedly daunting, but it still only gives some general advice and is nowhere near a complete recipe. At the very least, strategy design is an iterative search, with managers repeatedly considering solutions until they find one that is broadly acceptable. When managers design a strategy, it would seem reasonable for them to aim at doing everything well, giving low costs, good customer service, fast delivery, low inventory, flexibility, using high technology, and so on. Unfortunately, this is simply impossible, and managers always have to look for balances and compromises. For instance, a company cannot simultaneously minimize its investment in stock and still keep everything in store to guarantee availability. It cannot give the fastest delivery while minimizing the costs of transport. So managers have to design strategies that concentrate on their most pressing needs. In other words, they focus on some aspects of performance. Deciding where to put the focus is one of the key skills of managers. Initial suggestions follow the traditional view of marketing that organizations compete through the 4 Ps: product, place, promotion, and price, and logistics should focus on some aspects of these. A broader view says that customers are concerned with cost, quality, service level, reliability, availability, flexibility, delivery speed, location, sourcing, supplier relations, environmental impact, recycling, and a whole range of other things. Organizations could gain a competitive advantage by focusing on any of these, or in different circumstances, almost any facet of logistics. Each organization designs its own logistics strategy, but they often move along similar lines. In reality, firms often use some variation on common generic strategies, perhaps low costs or quick service. There are essentially 3 generic strategies. Cost leadership makes the same or comparable products as competitors but a lower price. Product differentiation makes products that customers cannot get from other sources. And market niche specializes in some way, perhaps dealing with a limited part of the market, offering a specialized service. The third approach of delivering a niche service calls for specialization, offering services to a market that is somehow limited. For most companies, this option is too restricting, and the choice is essentially between focusing on low costs and offering customers a novel service. We discussed so far the design of a logistics strategy, which contains all of the long-term goals, plans, policies, culture, resources, decisions and actions relating to an organization's supply chain. But even the best design strategy is no use unless it is actually used. This means taking the plans and ideas described in the strategy and translating them into actions. Managers look to the logistics strategy for guidance when they make more detailed, lower-level decisions. For instance, a strategy of selling products through a website would affect managers' medium-term, tactical decisions about warehousing, investment in stock, transport, materials handling, recruiting and training, customer service, and so on. These tactical decisions in turn affect short-term operational decisions about resource scheduling, inventory control, expediting vehicle routes, and so on. You can see that this gives a mechanism for implementing strategy with decisions moving progressively downwards through layers of management and each layer adding progressively more details. Managers at each level look at the aims and requirements set by managers above and they decide the actions they must take to achieve them. These actions define their own goals and requirements which are passed down to managers below. When this is repeated through the different levels of management, it gives a mechanism for cascading decisions down from the strategy. Suppose that senior managers set a strategy of selling in a certain market. Then the next layer of managers would make a decision to open a local warehouse, followed by a series of increasingly detailed decisions about the type of products to be stored, suppliers to use, how much of an item to keep in stock, how to monitor demand, how much to order, where to put the order, and so on. Eventually, this cascade of decisions moves down to the most detailed level and defines all aspects of logistics. The iterative expansion of a logistics strategy can be surprisingly difficult. You can imagine this when a strategy is poorly designed and lower managers have to translate vague concepts like global leadership into actual operations. But it can also be difficult to implement a good strategy that has been properly designed. We can suggest the following list of common problems with implementing logistics strategies. People who design the strategy are not responsible for the implementation. People who implement a strategy have little interest and at best pay lip service to their aims. The strategy is badly designed, perhaps having goals that are too vague or a mistaken focus. The strategy is designed without enough knowledge, information, or input from the broad organization. It is impossible to translate the strategy goals into actual real operations. The strategy does not take enough account of constraints on operations. The strategy is overambitious or unrealistic. Enthusiasm for the strategy declines over time. One surprisingly common mistake is to go through all the steps of designing a strategy and then starting to think about its implementation. The result often cannot be implemented, and an obvious way of avoiding this is to consider implementation all the way through the design. This needs widespread participation in the design process, particularly from those most closely involved with its implementation. A key task in implementing a strategy is to define who is responsible for all the remaining activities, to build an organization that is capable of achieving the aims. This starts with an appropriate structure for the logistics function with clearly defined responsibilities. It also adds the systems, human resources, culture, and resources that support the structure. Together, these form the logistics infrastructure. Decisions about these define the relationship between units, but logistics is organized in a huge number of different ways, and there is certainly no single best arrangement. A small company might have one person looking after everything. A medium-sized company might have a small logistics department with different sections for purchasing, transport, stock control, distribution, and so on. A large organization might have a distinct logistics division employing thousands of people. Sometimes all the activities are organized in a single department, reporting to a logistics manager or director. Sometimes they are part of a larger department, such as marketing or production. Sometimes they are spread out in small pockets throughout a company. And also they can be contracted out to third-party suppliers. Each activity might be in a distinct unit, or there might be cross-functional task forces, special project teams, self-contained work teams, or other adjustments. Although there is no standard pattern, there are a couple of organizational structures that are most common. Functional organization, a traditional view where units are defined by the function that they perform. This gives different divisions for procurement, transport, warehousing, and others, and each manager reports to a more senior manager within the same function. The benefits might be stable groups that work well together, pooling expertise and sharing knowledge, easy to administer, clear authority, and so on. On the other hand, it has the disadvantages of encouraging a silo mentality, where each function concentrates on its own work rather than the broader good of the company. Product organization, where each group is responsible for the logistics of a particular type of product. This has the advantages of concentrating specialized knowledge about each product, developing and retaining special expertise, and simplified communications. But the main strength is a focus on the delivery of product to satisfy customers. On the negative side, that could be duplicate efforts, having people reporting to managers with no knowledge of their functional skills, no one with the responsibility for an entire function, and difficulty in transferring skills between products. Hybrid organization, which combines aspects of both functional and product structures. There are many forms of hybrid structure, which makes it the most widespread type in practice. One common format has an overall functional structure, but one major product is so important that it is worth having a distinct group to look after it. Then the units are based on a mixture of functions and products. Matrix organization are a type of hybrid where a functional organization is overlaid by a product organization, as shown in this picture. You can imagine this in an organization that works with a number of key products, and then purchasing people, for example, work both within a purchasing and department and also on a specific product. Again, this structure comes in many different varieties based on different types of division and allocation of authority. It has the advantages of focusing on the key operations, being flexible and adapting the needs, allowing easy transfers of skills and easier information flows. On the other hand, there are problems with built-in conflicts, extra management overheads, complex authority relationships, and problems of everyone having at least two managers with conflicting interests. Self-managed groups, where authority is delegated down to groups working within the organization. Traditional organizational structures are based on a hierarchy with reporting upwards and control downwards. Self-managed groups have almost all of the decisions and control delegated to lower levels, with each group working to a large extent independently. This structure has the benefit of encouraging expertise. It is very flexible and delegates authority to appropriate levels. The drawbacks include a loss of overall coordination and control, difficult communications, problems with defining authority, and general complexity. Managers should design an organizational structure that best achieves their goals, giving the best match between strategy and structure. There is certainly no single best structure for all conditions, and the usual practice is to choose a basic design, modify it if necessary, and then supplement it with coordinating communication and control mechanisms. After designing the organizational structure, the next step is to add the systems to support it, for accounts, communications, information, order processing, and other basic operations. There may also be specialized systems such as reservation systems in airlines, parcel tracking in logistics companies, maintenance systems for service companies, and so on. Most of these systems are based on the collection of data, its analysis, and presentation of results around the company. They obviously come in huge variety of forms, ranging from post-it stickers through the artificial intelligence systems with automated decisions. However, their essential structure consists of hardware that collects and delivers information, rules and procedures for deciding what information is delivered to each person, and statements of how they should respond to the information. The key question is how to get people motivated. There has been a huge amount of work in trying to answer to this, often following the classical studies of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Herzberg's internal and external motivators. But there is still no agreement about the best approach beyond the general advice, which is to put the emphasis on commitment to people, recognizing that employees are a key strategic resource, and having clear policies about employees, job security, and rewards. Shared purpose through strategic leadership, distribution of information, participation in decision making. Enabling structures, including the organizational structure, communications, and informal structures. Learning and development with a commitment to training, upgrading skills, continuous improvement, and so on. Involvement with team working, removal of internal boundaries, participation and recognition. When these are practiced over the long term, they become a part of the organization's broader culture.